Hi. Love going last. So the Pirate Party formed in 2008. We registered in 2013 and we ran in the recent federal election. We stand on a platform primarily based around digital and civil liberties, and that's why I'm here today. I'm going to talk specifically around the surveillance state and go into a bit more detail about how this came to be part of the public consciousness and started becoming laws that make no sense. So around 2008, 2009, there were rumours of illegal wiretapping occurring in the United States. It was initially believed to just be essentially wiretapping in its traditional sense, ordinary telephones. We then saw the national security inquiry be started by Labor in 2012. Legislation relating to this inquiry was rumoured to be in existence since the first Rudd government. However, no legislation actually surfaced. It went between several different attorney generals. But the gist of it, by the time it had actually been brought to a head as a discussion paper, was to give ASIO infinitely more powers, introduce 2 years data retention, give ASIO the ability to hack any computer for essentially any purpose, but also for the purposes of surveillance. And it handed significant judicial powers to the Attorney General with essentially no oversight, as is usually the way. And then June 2013, we had Snowden's revelations, which were amazing. Quite simply, the extent to which the surveillance of the NSA was pervading everybody's life internationally had not previously been recognised to even be possible to such an extent. This level of surveillance was that they could essentially store almost anything that had passed anywhere in the world over a digital network for a set amount of time, perhaps a day. But even the ability to just search all of that content within a day was beyond the wildest dreams of even the biggest crypto conspirator. I mean, it's just amazing to the extent that they were doing this. So data retention is a mess, as you may have noticed. The Attorney General was unable to explain just what it was. He wants to know where you live, but not your address, or he wants to know your address, but not where you live. We have the Prime Minister coming out saying, of course, it will be taking every website you've ever been to. Oh, wait, no, that's not what I was meant to say. No. We're not actually sure what we're talking about. We have a digitally illiterate cabal that call themselves a cabinet. It's quite true. The small group that signed off on the initial statement that came out is known as the National Security Committee. It's a chunk of the cabinet that doesn't include the communications minister. Think about that for a minute. So Mr. Brandes comes out and says, this is something that the West is doing. Yeah, except it isn't. The EU Court of Justice struck it down as disproportionate and against the human rights. Denmark says it doesn't work. The actual quote is, the implementation of session logging proved to be unusable to the police. This became clear the first time they tried to use the data as part of an investigation. Very expensive, doesn't work. So a trope that's commonly thrown out to support data retention is that, oh, well, the kids these days don't care about privacy. They give it away to Google, they give it away to Facebook. Why should we have to ask? And it's quite simple, because the people, when they use Facebook, consented to giving over that data. Privacy is an absolute. You choose what data you give over and what data you do not in any conversation. So to say that teens these days are not actually accepting privacy as a right is simply not true. They've just changed how they deal with privacy. You may notice that the 13 to 17 age group is actually not adopting Facebook as quickly as previous generations. They're actually moving to stuff like WhatsApp, which is an ephemeral messaging service that deletes the messages rather quickly. They're actually taking their privacy more intensively than previous generations have adapted to the internet, because they're deliberately withholding and sharing content as they feel appropriate. They're taking charge of their privacy. So while they're opting to release more information than perhaps generations would previously, that was a choice they made. So the fact that the government would be retaining even just metadata, knowing that people can get around it with VPNs and pretty much anything very easily, and that people actually do have respect for their privacy, what is the purpose behind it? And quite simply, the only purpose that could be there is the chilling effect. The chilling effect that we can always know what you're doing, behave. Because that's the only impact it has in practice. People know that they can easily get around this. But it's an attack on free expression, not privacy, because they're things you would just merely not say because you are aware that you're always being watched. It changes your behavior. And metadata is data. Malte Spitz, a Greens representative in Germany, once sued his telco for 6 months worth of metadata and then mapped it out on a map. You can press play and watch where he went for 6 months with minute detail. That's what metadata tells you in this era. It tells you where you are at all times. It is the perfect spying device. So we're seeing that this is even playing into the copyright debate. With data retention, the most recent metadata definition that came out included uploads and downloads, because you really need to know that that terrorist downloaded 4 gigs of movies that night. No, it comes down to just assisting rent-seeking industries that refuse to adapt to the digital era. So should we be afraid? Well, no. Ultimately, no. We still have the power to change this. There are mechanisms to deal with this. So we're seeing, even within the last 2 weeks, Apple and Google are making moves to limit the ability for surveillance to actually work on their devices. So instead of saying, sorry government, we won't give that to you, they can now say, sorry government, we can't give that to you because they don't have access to the data because it's encrypted by default. What has been discussed on this panel was we all need to learn to encrypt, but the difficulty is, hi, I'm a software developer and it's hard for me to do it right. The software doesn't make it easy for you to do, but there are projects now that it's actually impacting on programmers that are making it easier for everyone to get involved. So there's a project that Scott referred to earlier, Invisible IM, which uses Tor. It's currently in alpha, so don't trust it yet until it's actually done. But the idea is that it uses Tor and allows you to contact people completely anonymously without leaving any metadata. It makes you able to communicate things. It allows you to actually have proper whistleblowing without security holes, and it's as simple as installing one app. There's something called Tox IM, which aims to replace Skype for doing video calls. So it's less secure, but it's more convenient. But it comes down to a risk, a trade-off of risks. So this one makes it as easy as Skype, but secure by default, so it makes it much harder for them to actually hack you if they can at all. Whereas Skype is open by default, we give everything to the US government, no questions asked, pat, pat. But in Australia, beyond the digital stuff, we have governance based on fear. 3-word slogans, throw people in concentration camps because we don't like the colour of them. National security proposals that include jail sentences for journalists who dare discuss a special intelligence operation, whether they were aware it existed or not, and go to jail for 5 to 10 years for doing what is the public interest. And then you have random scare campaigns of they're coming to behead randoms, watch out children, allegedly at the end. So how real is our democracy? Well, we live in a country where the executive has the power to sign treaties without oversight and go to war without question. There's limited capacity for smaller parties to contest by the nature of the system. Once one party gets control of both houses, they change electoral laws to make it impossible for you to even stand up. We're seeing a rolling back of freedom of information laws. They're planning to defund the Office of the Australian Information Commissioner, and I myself am a prolific freedom of information requester, multiple. And I've noticed a significant trend of the Attorney General's Department knowing that you can no longer have their decisions reviewed for free. They now make very creative legal decisions about why they won't give you any information. We're seeing in the copyright debate examples of democracy failing. We're seeing this absurd copyright legislation pop up recently, which is, hey, we're going to institute graduated response, a 3 strikes law, get accused 3 times of downloading a thing and we'll take you away from the internet forever. And data retention to go with that, because how else can we enforce it? And also we will try blocking websites like the Pirate Bay, where I was actually at a copyright forum where representatives of the industry were saying, no, we know it's whack-a-mole. We just think it's a brilliant idea. That was almost a quote. So they know they can't stop it, but they want to waste time and money of other industries to actually do it. So we're seeing that the Australian Law Reform Commission said that fair use should be instituted in Australian copyright law. Instead of following that, we're going down the path of solving a problem that doesn't exist with 2 solutions that have been proven to not work. We're seeing that all of this is happening essentially because large corporations like Village Roadshow donate several $1 million to large parties over several years and they get their policies, but the people who voted for them don't get their policies. We then see stuff like the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement and Trade and Services Agreement going by without any oversight because this is how we've always done it, so this is how we're always going to do it. So you have civil society replacing what essentially used to be never really was, but should have been part of natural democratic discourse. The only way anyone ever saw drafts of the Anti-Counterfeiting Trade Agreement, or TPP, was because WikiLeaks leaked it. WikiLeaks is what's allowing democratic discourse in Australia. Think about that quite deeply for a minute. The only reason freedom of information requests are accessible to the common person is because organisations like Open Australia create centralised repositories where you can, the website's called righttoknow.org.au, you can go there, we assist you making requests for any information. So you can see how other people have done it, you can be inspired, and you can do your own thing. It finds all the email addresses for you for each department, and even departments that don't legally have to accept FOI requests, you can do it through the service just to annoy them, and they go, So we've seen social media change how democratic discourse works in Australia completely. Since the first Rudd ministry, social media has been pretty much one of the primary ways that my generation and the generation above me communicate politically. So it's changed the entire landscape. That election, they didn't even know how to handle it. They're like, we don't know what social media is. So it was entirely controlled by us, and it was excellent. But now we're seeing that you get a lot of the Labor hacks and the Liberal hacks and the bots, and it's all hijacked like every other part of the chain. But we're still in control. We can just ignore that. We can just go around. So quite simply, in conclusion, civil society picks up the slack where government and the rest of society fails. We now have the technology to build the tools to kind of push in the other direction. We need executive powers to be rolled back, especially around unilaterally being able to decide when we go to war and when we sign treaties, because once a treaty is signed, it's not necessarily ratified, but it can't be changed, so it allows backroom deals to occur, and international legislative organs being used for the purposes of changing domestic legislation without oversight. We have a strong need for a Bill of Rights. I think that's become quite evident. We have a strong need for proactive release of information, because I shouldn't have to request every single small piece of information because you won't release it. There's an essential need for transparency in government, especially around donations and privacy for the citizen, not the inverse. I can't believe that we're getting into a society where it is said, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear. And you're like, you, if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to fear, Mr. Government, you. But never does a journalist turn around and point and say that, and that drives me insane. And we need greater representation by those who actually understand the implications of the legislation they're trying to implement on the technology they've never used. Thanks.